So dear beloved community, it's so wonderful to be together. Warm greetings to each of you. Congratulations for reaching the 3rd of January in the year 2021. It's so lovely to have a chance to sit together with the Sangha again after what seems like a little while. Here in Mountain Spring, we're enjoying the rain. Today we had a break in the rain this afternoon, which was a lovely experience. We had a chance to be outside and enjoy the garden, but just about a minute and a half ago, the rain has come in again. And it's a beautiful thing to be sitting here and experiencing the sound of the rain. So after quite a period of time, I think the last time we had a chance to explore these teachings from the Book of Eights was on November 22nd. So over the past number of weeks, we've been listening to Tay's series of talks on the Discourse on Absolute Truth, which was the previous poem in this series that we were looking into. I hope that you've enjoyed and benefited a lot from those talks of Tay. In Tay's talks on the Discourse on Absolute Truth, he reminds us of our tendency to create a self, a fixed position around many, if not all, of our experiences. He also reminds us that if it's separated from a living insight that's embodied in our everyday life, that Buddhism itself can become a very big self. I don't know about you, but I've noticed as I get older, people's greetings have changed from "How are you today?" to "Are you feeling all right?" Getting older is one of the primal fears for many of us. Just think of how many industries are designed in such a way so as to help us mask this natural process. Often people consider Buddhism as morbid because, quite differently to our usual tendency toward avoidance, we turn towards, we look deeply into, and we contemplate our individual and collective sickness, old age, and death. Actually turning towards rather than away from these marks of existence within our own lives and within the lives of those around. This turning towards these marks of existence, what we call these marks of existence, sickness, old age, death, and so on, is the basic orientation of Buddhism. The fundamental experiences that called the Buddha forth on his journey of discovery. They're also what can call us forth from our hiding places, not only once, but many times over. In fact, in Buddhism, we don't consider these things as obstacles, but rather we consider them as noble messengers, as every moment opportunities for us to be called forth ourselves out of our complacency. Turning towards them is at the same time a courageous act, and also one of the most important steps on our path of awakening. To turn towards means to choose to befriend these experiences, large and small, rather than to turn away. To befriend these noble messengers here doesn't mean to wallow in them, but to invite them to be our teachers, rather than obstacles to be gotten rid of, which is our usual way of interacting with the difficult situations of our life. When we speak of waking up, it's important to understand that we're speaking of waking up to your own experience, your own life, just as it is, right in the heart of your lived experience. It seems to me that in every moment, we have an opportunity to be called forth if we're attentive, if we're mindful, to open our heart just a little bit more, to go just a little more deeply. Sometimes going just a little bit more deeply, entering the heart of our life, might even mean rethinking what meditation or spirituality is, or what it looks like. The Buddhist approach is that insight doesn't arise from books or fall from the sky. It would be great if it did. There are so many people who have a lot of knowledge about Buddhist texts and Buddhist concepts. They've done so many courses or theoretical retreats, and they can quote great teachers and teachings at length. But many of these friends can still suffer very deeply, having mistaken information for insight. Insight arises when we look deeply into these fundamental characteristics of our existence in each and every moment. To be honest, many times this is the very last thing that we want to do. Many times to turn towards the pain, to turn towards the loneliness, to turn towards the fear doesn't feel that advanced. In the same way, many people say things like, oh, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh just talks about breathing in and out, or walking slowly, closing a door silently, picking up and putting down a cup gently. It's not very deep. It's not very advanced. To those friends, I say that's exactly right. But in fact, the most advanced, the most profound practices in Buddhism are contained in the seemingly simple, the most overlooked. It's often the most overlooked thing in our lives that's in fact the most transformative. The fundamental Plum Village approach, building on this understanding, is that we are really not interested if somebody speaks about high meditation states or theoretical ideas and so on, if they can't walk peacefully. Interact gently and mindfully. If we can't open and close a door gently and mindfully. If we're rushing around like a ghost is chasing us. There's that old Zen story of a Buddhist scholar coming to visit a Zen master, and the scholar was sharing with the Zen master all kinds of philosophical ideas and ideas about meditation. The Zen master listened carefully and then asked the scholar, today it's raining. When you came in, on which side of your shoes did you put your umbrella? There's such a temptation to transcend, to rise above. And one subtle but pervasive way that people try to transcend is to rise above everyday experience into the realm of concepts and ideas about something. And for so many, spirituality has become all about floating on clouds and listening to harp music, rather than opening and closing a door, going to the bathroom, washing the dishes, sweeping the floor, placing our shoes neatly. And with this mindset, we see our everyday life as an unfortunate interruption to the thing that we call my practice. To me, I feel that's a pity and it's a waste. Before continuing, I should probably say, for all of you who are currently feverishly writing comments and emails, I don't have anything against harp music. I like harp music. But the engaged practice of meditation, in fact, the fundamental practice of a bodhisattva, is not to aim to rise above, not to aim to transcend, but rather to understand deeply each and every experience just as it is, and to not run away. To be willing to show up and not try to rise above or shut down to any experience. This is really not easy. requires a lot of courage. It's much more difficult than learning the lists, doing a theoretical course, and being able to quote so many texts. To do this fundamental work of turning towards, of looking deeply at and engaging with our daily life, just as it is, as our practice. It's actually quite radical to show up for what is and shine the light of mindfulness on it. Not just the easy moments. When we talk about engaging with our daily life as a practice, we're not just talking about the blissful and easy moments, we're talking about each and every moment of our life. The moments also when we're afraid, the moments when we're angry, the moments when we're lonely or in pain. In the Discourse on the Four Establishments of Mindfulness and other discourses of the Buddha, there are wonderful meditations on contemplating our own death. I'll never forget one time we had a group of young people come to Deer Park Monastery to visit. They were there for the weekend. They'd come from a college nearby and were having an opportunity to experience a weekend of mindfulness in the monastery. So that afternoon, just after they arrived and they'd settled into their rooms, they came and they joined the brothers in Solidity Hamlet for sitting meditation. So in that sitting meditation session, we would always sit and then enjoy some indoor walking meditation, and then we would read a sutra. That afternoon, the brothers were reading the section of the Satipatthana, the section of the Four Establishments of Mindfulness that begins, the practitioner sits contemplating their body as a corpse, and then it goes through the different stages of decay of a body. I'm never going to forget the looks on the faces of these young ones as they were sitting there. I guess they were thinking, what on earth have I gotten myself into? But rather than being morbid, meditation on death, on this process that happens not only once, but it's happening in each and every moment, actually nurtures joy and helps us to treasure what we have and see the impermanent and interconnected nature of things. In this week's poem that we're going to be exploring together this evening, we have a chance to consider some of the fundamental marks of existence and receive an invitation to step forward boldly on our unique journey of discovery. So why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell, coming back to our breathing, coming back to our bodies, and then we'll listen to this week's poem, which is number 6 in the Atthakavagga, the Book of Eights. And after we've heard the poem in its entirety, we'll go through verse by verse and just have some reflections on each of the verses. So poem number 6. Life's so short. You'll die before you turn 100. If any live longer, they'll still die because of old age. People grieve for things considered as mine, though possessions are not permanent and are subject to decay. See this and don't get stuck in your comfortable house. In death, everything you think is yours is abandoned, yet some still think it is mine. Knowing this, the wise are no longer slavishly devoted to that which they think of as mine. Just as when waking up, We no longer see whatever was encountered in a dream. So one no longer sees loved ones when they've passed away. When seen and heard, people are called by name. When dead, only the telling of their name remains. Greedy people get stuck with sorrow, despair, and selfishness. The wise live seeing security and abandon possessions. A mendicant, independent, and keeping company with a secluded mind, of such a one all are agreed, in being they'll not be seen again. The wise depend on nothing, have no likes or dislikes. Sorrow and selfishness do not stain that one, like water does not stick to a lotus leaf. Just as a drop of water does not stick to a lotus leaf or water to a lotus flower, so the wise one does not adhere to the seen, heard, or the sensed. Being purified, they don't conceive upon the seen, heard, and cognized, and don't wish for purification from another. Such a person neither takes on passion nor pushes it away. So let's have an opportunity to reflect on this powerful poem verse by verse. Life's so short, you'll die before you turn 100. If any live longer, they'll still die because of old age. People grieve for things considered as mine, though possessions are not permanent and are subject to decay. See this and don't get stuck in your comfortable house. Many of you will be familiar with the ancient practice of sealing a letter with wax, sealing an envelope that has a letter in it with wax. In this practice, you melt wax onto the flap of the envelope and then press a ring or a stone with your insignia in it into the wax. And it proves its authenticity. And also when somebody receives that letter, they know it hasn't been opened. So in Asia, there's a similar practice in which everything official is marked with our name seal. And without the name seal in vermilion ink, it's not authentic. In Plum Village, in the Plum Village lineage, every teaching, every Dharma talk or informal sharing that's offered needs to contain these following 4 characteristics. Which we call the Plum Village Dharma seals, in order to be considered authentic, an authentic Plum Village teaching. The first is, I've arrived, I'm home. That happiness, nirvana, liberation, or peace, and so on, is not a future destination, not somewhere else necessarily, but needs to be touched in each and every moment. When we walk, when we cut the grass, when we wash the dishes, or when we open and close the door. So that's the first Dharma seal that should always be present in any teaching offered by a Dharma teacher of the Plum Village tradition. The second is going as a river, not as a drop of water. And this practice is a very powerful practice for us in our modern society of letting go of a sense of our own individual goals only, but going as a community, trusting in the Sangha's insight of walking together with our spiritual community, going as a river, not as a drop of water. So Plum Village Dharma teachers will never try to direct all the attention to themselves, but always we will direct attention to the community as a manifestation of the insight of the Buddha. In fact, our teacher Thay often shared that in this modern day and age, the next manifestation of a Buddha could well be a community. And if we look at the situation of Buddhism in general, one of the big difficulties that we're facing in a lot of communities and monasteries and centers around the world is a lot of charisma around individuals. So this is a powerful medicine for our time, community rather than individuals, both on a collective level and also in our own personal practice, to let go of our own personal ideas and trust in the wisdom of the community in which we've taken refuge in. The third is the interbeing nature of the two truths and the times, which we've discussed in our talk on the previous poem, the absolute truth and the relative truth, and so on. And the fourth is continuous ripening, that insight is continually being revealed, and this process of discovery is ongoing. It never ends. As we read in the 14 mindfulness trainings, that the knowledge we presently possess is not changeless absolute truth, and that we're ready to learn throughout our lives. And more generally in Buddhism, speaking of the 4 Dharma seals of Plum Village, in Buddhism in general, there are 3 Dharma seals called the marks of existence, which are found in each and every moment, of course, and should also be seen in each and every authentic teaching that's offered. If we can't find these Dharma seals in a teaching or a talk or a Dharma book somewhere, then they're not considered to be authentic teachings of the Buddha. These 3 characteristics are lenses through which we contemplate our experience in each and every moment. If we use these lenses to look deeply, then we can see these characteristics clearly in every experience, in every moment. It might actually be nice to have a series of talks looking deeply into these characteristics in the future. Tonight, we just have time to touch them briefly. There are actually slightly different versions of these 3 marks of existence in the Theravada and the Mahayana schools of Buddhism. In the Theravada school, the 3 marks of existence, which are called in Pali the tilakkhana, are suffering or unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, and non-self, dukkha, anicca, anatta. In the Mahayana school, the Tri Lakshana in Sanskrit are impermanence, non-self, and nirvana. Anitya, anatta, and nirvana. In this current poem of the Book of Eights, we encounter the Dharma seal of impermanence. In Buddhism, impermanence, anicca, is considered as one of these 3 marks of existence, one of the fundamental aspects of the way things are. Things are constantly in a state of change, including ourselves on all levels. We have this delusion that today is not going to be the day that we die. One of these days we'll wake up and it will be the day that we die. In fact, in the monastic tradition, there's a teaching for monastics that every time we leave our room, the room that we're staying in, we should leave it as if we're never going to return to it again. This can sound a little bit morbid, but it's a very beautiful practice if we look at it a little bit more deeply. Our room here is, of course, our physical room, but also every encounter or relationship. To leave that encounter, that relationship, that room, as if we'll never have a chance to go back there. We'll never walk into that space again. We have this delusion that everything's going to remain the same, but in fact, our life, the situation of our life is constantly changing, and the situation of our world around us is constantly changing. One day, this will be the reality for us. Our death is coming quite quickly. It could come at any moment. In fact, it's already happening. Basically, with the eyes of impermanence, we see that everything that's come into existence is constantly in a state of growth, of change, of arising, of passing away. If we wanted to have a sense of something that's arising and changing and then passing away and developing into something new, then all we need to do is to observe the flow of our mind. It's never the same from one minute to the next, as anyone who's ever practiced meditation can share. As our teacher Tay teaches us, things change because the causes and conditions change. This is actually one of our primal fears as human beings because we crave constancy. Just look at all of our habits and rituals. If one little thing is different, we freak out. We try so hard to control every little thing in our life so that we can avoid acknowledging that nothing remains forever. So therefore, there can be a bit of a tendency to view impermanence in negative terms as something bad, something to just kind of be acknowledged, but not really celebrated. In fact, I've even noticed that it's sometimes used as the Buddhist equivalent of a curse word. People will say something like, oh, impermanence, something like that. That's probably the closest Buddhists get to a curse word, impermanence or suffering. But it's actually thanks to impermanence that all change and transformation is possible. Tay is well known for saying that we should, rather than feeling that impermanence is a bother, we should actually be celebrating it. And he used to say, long live impermanence. Contrary to our usual way of seeing, it's actually impermanence that gives us our true security. Insight is expressed in all aspects of our being. We currently live in this realm which has two interconnected notions, the notion of time and the notion of space. Recognizing or touching impermanence is insight, or if you like it better, liberating insight that's revealed through the lens of time. And non-self, the understanding that nothing has a separate existence, that everything inter-is with everything else, is the same liberating insight that's revealed through the lens of space. These two, impermanence and non-self or interbeing, are two of the Dharma seals, the marks of existence that we can discover in each and every moment. Why don't we have a sound of the bell? On my last trip to Korea, I was given a very beautiful Korean tea bowl. I really loved this bowl so much. It was such a joy to use. I loved it so much. And one day, as I was rinsing this bowl, I was cleaning the tea bowl outside of my room. I was pouring water from the bowl and it slipped out of my hand, and it flew out of my hand and began to fall towards the earth. And funnily enough, in that moment, as it was still in the air, part of me realized it was just a very small realization. It was just a very small moment in which I had a sense that from the very beginning, it had already been broken, in the sense that this formation of tea bowl was only a brief moment in time of an endless process of changing formations that were stretching backwards and forwards infinitely. That although the tea bowl was changing form and I wouldn't be drinking tea out of it anymore, it didn't just disappear. The pottery, actually, I buried the pottery. It was quite a sentimental moment for me, but that tea bowl had been such a beautiful companion. So I had this moment of saying goodbye to that form, burying it there. I know exactly where the pottery shards are buried in Deer Park. But I also know that slowly over time, it's disintegrating further and entering the soil, and it will continue on in many different forms. So you too, your beloved ones and your beloved possessions are all the same. That we have a snapshot of something, whether it's an object or another person, or even our idea of ourself that's frozen in time somehow, but it's really only a brief moment in time that it has that form, and it's constantly in a process of change, of growth, and doesn't just disappear. It hasn't come from nothing. All those conditions were already there and they've come together to make a particular formation. And when those causes and conditions are no longer sufficient, or another condition comes in, just like that moment in which the water was on my fingers and my fingers were slippery, and that condition was enough with the forward movement of my hand for the bowl to leave my hand, then another condition can come in and mean that it's time for something to take on a new formation. And that's not something that happens only once, but something that's happening in each and every moment, although we're not normally aware of it. It might also be helpful for some of us to notice that in this poem that we're looking at this week, rather than emphasizing anatta, non-self or interbeing, as we would expect in later, more formulated teachings of the Buddha, in this poem, we have an emphasis on not mine. It's not my possession. Pali amama. It's not my possession. Not mine. Amama can be a very powerful and insightful lens to consider our experience. If I'm angry, for example, what is it that I called mine? That I froze in time in some way, that feels threatened and gives rise to this emotion that I call anger? What about if I'm happy? Or if I have physical pain and I have a reaction of some nature to that physical pain, and so forth. If we begin contemplating what is not mine, we also begin to notice what is mine. It's tempting to just say, well, nothing is mine at all. I have nothing. But that would perhaps be an incomplete insight. In the 5 awarenesses in Buddhism, we're reminded of the insight of the Buddha, that in fact, what is mine, in fact, the only thing that's really mine, are the fruits of my actions of body, my actions of speech, and my actions of mind. We call this our karma, our true inheritance. So our only belongings, our true inheritance, are the fruits of our actions of body, speech, and mind. So I find that practice of reflecting on amama, what is not mine, and what's mine, to be incredibly empowering. And I'd like to offer it to you as one way to put some of the aspects of this poem into practice. So notice in this very first stanza, we have the phrase, see this, and not know this. These two terms, seeing and knowing, appear many times in the Book of Eights. I wonder how many of us have reflected on the sutra opening verse in the Plum Village chanting book. For me, many times, reflecting on that sutra opening verse is enough to go very deep. I don't even need to read a sutra after that. The sutra opening verse is just enough. The Dharma is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to see it, to hear it, to study it, and to put it into practice. That's enough for me to reflect on what does it mean for me to see the Dharma. Not only just when I'm sitting in the meditation hall and chanting this verse, but what does it mean for me to see the Dharma in my daily life, to see the Dharma when I'm opening a door, to see the Dharma when I'm going to the bathroom, to see the Dharma when I'm washing the dishes. What does it mean to practice the Dharma, and what Dharma exactly am I practicing? I think many of us are quite skillful in the other two aspects that are mentioned in the sutra opening verse, hearing the Dharma and studying the Dharma. But in terms of seeing the Dharma for ourselves and putting something into practice, they're the things that maybe we could put a little bit more emphasis on, not only when we chant the opening verse, but in our daily life. So what does it mean to you to see the Dharma? The Dharma is not something in books or in Dharma talks, which is a little ironic, but it's a moment by moment reality that each of us needs to see and hear right in the heart of our daily lives. In this verse as well, we see the phrase, we hear the phrase, don't get stuck in your comfortable house. Whenever I read this line, I'm reminded of that well-known play, My Fair Lady. And there's that song in that play that says, all I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air. What's the rest of it? With one enormous chair. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? So here in this verse, getting stuck in our comfortable house means exactly that. The places of heart and mind that we habitually take refuge in, the places and states of mind that we go to when we try to shut everything out. So don't get stuck in our comfort zones. Be continually willing to grow, continually willing to step forward and expand our envelope. What states of mind or what behaviors do we repeatedly return to and rely on? This is a really great way to begin recognizing our real places of refuge rather than our ideal places of refuge. Our real true security is not in that comfortable internal or external house where we close all the windows and lock the doors to keep life out, but counterintuitively by being willing to open wide the doors and open the windows and to step forward. And that takes courage. And the poem continues. In death, everything you think is yours is abandoned, yet some still think it is mine. Knowing this, the wise are no longer slavishly devoted to that which they think of as mine. In the last talk that we had on these series of texts in the Book of Eights, I offered an exercise to contemplate our labels. And this is one way of contemplating the things that we think are ours. Everything that we think of as ours is not only the physical things, but also accomplishments, ideas, perceptions, and so on. And this is where the charnel ground, the death meditations of the Satipatthana Sutra and other meditation lineages and teachings are really powerful and important, since we begin to touch and see on a visceral level that everything that we identify with, our body, our intellect, our insights, and so on, all the ways that we define ourselves are impermanent and are not us. Birth and death as we spoke of earlier, are not one-time events, but constant experiences on all levels of our being, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and so on, all the different levels of our experience that are occurring constantly, from the most concrete to the most subtle. And the poem continues, just as when waking up, we no longer see whatever was encountered in a dream, so one no longer sees loved ones when they've passed away. When seen and heard, people are called by name. When dead, only the telling of their name remains. I love this line, only the telling of the name remains. Those who carry their memory. If we realize birth and death as a moment-by-moment experience, we also begin to understand deeply that the people around us are constantly in a process of change. They're like rivers in which there's a certain flow, but the water's always moving on. The moment we identify something, it's already changed. Many years ago, it was perhaps around 1998, I had a dream in which Tay came up to me in the dream and he asked me, well, Brother Phappai, is it yes or is it no? And in the dream, I turned to Tay and I said, it's yes, Tay. The practice of saying yes to each moment, of saying yes to the noble messengers of our lives, of not shutting down, is a profound one. I actually feel that this practice of saying yes to whatever is can be the practice of a lifetime. If we can enjoy the sound of the bell. The poem continues, greedy people get stuck with sorrow, despair, and selfishness. The wise live seeing security and abandon possessions. So here in this first line, we're reminded of the insight that's almost counterintuitive, that if we cling onto things, possessions, people, situations, then all we're left with in the end will be sorrow, despair, and selfishness in the view of the poem. In an earlier series of teachings, we reflected on the three basic roots that are deep in our consciousness. Greed, which comes from a perception of lack, that we're lacking something, either internally or externally. Ill will or aversion, and delusion. So here in this poem, sorrow, despair, and selfishness are similes for these three deep, unwholesome roots. When we read the line, live seeing security here, we're not talking about financial security or a big padlock on your door, but rather what's being spoken about here is the security of being firmly on your path of transformation, your path of liberation. The sense that you've entered the stream and you're flowing along without any possibility of moving back in the direction of our old patterns of suffering. So notice that I said path of liberation rather than path to liberation, since liberation is not a one-time event, but it's a continual process. A few moments ago, I spoke about these three roots in our consciousness, these three deep, unwholesome roots. And for those of you who listened to the earlier series of talks, you know that I mentioned that out of these three roots of greed, of thirst, of tanha, of ill will, and of delusion, one or other of the roots will be stronger in each of us. You know, it depends on our own characteristics. So we carry around these tendencies within us, both these unwholesome tendencies, but also skillful tendencies as well. And those tendencies shape the way that we interact with and we experience the world. I was considering the other day that if we don't understand our roots deeply and don't understand our tendencies deeply, then wherever we go, we create the same situations. We could be in a place as a perfect practice center, but still will find something that's challenging, and every single place has its challenging aspects. However, if we have nurtured our wholesome qualities, then even with some challenging aspects, we feel it's the perfect place of practice. In fact, it is because of the challenging circumstances that it's a perfect place of practice. In Buddhism, we have, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, some aspects of Mahayana Buddhism, we have the view of being reborn in the Pure Land, and the Pure Land being a place where there's no difficulties, no challenges. And there are some people who believe that's a perfect place of practice. Our teacher Tay has said he wouldn't really want to recommend people to go to the Pure Land, because what would you have to practice with? How would you transform in that situation? I also think that sometimes, even if we were reborn in the Pure Land, we would get to the Pure Land where it's said in the sutras that there are beautiful lotus flowers, and Amitabha Buddha is giving Dharma talks, and even the wind blowing through the trees is making Dharma music, and the birds are chanting and things like that. Wherever we go, we have all of these amazing conditions of practice. But we might be in the Pure Land, and if we haven't transformed these tendencies, after a day or so, we start thinking, Amitabha Buddha is giving another Dharma talk. He's probably going to repeat the same things he said yesterday. And you know, even if he doesn't repeat the same things, he's going to go on way too long. He'll probably say a lot, or powerful a lot, or too many times. I'm just going to skip it today. Or we say these lotus flowers, they're supposed to be bigger than this. They're not that big at all, are they? And this wind, it's constantly blowing, and all this noise in the trees, and the birds chattering and chanting all the time. Can't they stop for a minute? I just want some peace. This is the situation that we're in constantly. We actually carry around our stuff with us. So it's important for us to be able to recognize that very often it's our own tendencies that create the ways in which we experience a place that we're in. That a place, an external environment is an external environment with its own particular challenges and particular strengths. But in one sense, in the Zen sense, it's like the koan of the one hand clapping. It's just one hand. It's only when we bring up the other hand of our own tendencies that they make a sound, that there's a reaction. So looking into these tendencies is an important practice, especially when we look with the eyes of the Atthakavagga. It's an empowering practice. It's a practice for us to do in a very concrete way in each and every moment, to be able to look and see what environment am I in, both externally and internally, and how am I contributing to that? And if we understand that, then we understand that a different choice is possible, and that's incredibly empowering. And that even if we change the external environment, that without changing those internal factors within ourselves, it doesn't really matter what the external environment is. The same situation will keep repeating in some way. So the poem continues: a mendicant or a practitioner, independent, and keeping company with a secluded mind, of such a one All are agreed. In being, they'll not be seen again. In this verse, we see the word, or we hear the word, independent. Independent means having discovered the truth for yourself. It's very much connected with the earlier phrase, to live seeing security. And in Buddhism in general, and specifically in the Book of Eights, this is a very important concern for each one of us to be able to touch and to realize these truths for ourselves, to not be repeating ideas or insights from others, but rather to be tapping into the wisdom that's deep within each one of us and bringing that forward. So the phrase secluded mind in this verse means being focused and concentrated, of being able to recognize sensory input and to be able to close the sense doors when necessary. In the earlier series on the 4 nutriments, we had quite a detailed talk on the sense doors and sensory impressions. And so it might be helpful to refer back to that talk. And they have no fixed abode. This is referring to both the outside dwelling places, the places of refuge that we spoke about a few moments ago, and also the internal dwelling places. We don't get stuck or caught anywhere. Many of us recite the refuges every day. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. In Chinese, there's a beautiful phrase in the refuges. I return to and I rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I often take this as a contemplation to expand upon what I spoke about earlier and reflect upon what I constantly return to and rely upon in my daily life. And I don't know about you, but I know people who've set up quite a nice dwelling place in anger and resentment. I also know people who've set up a very beautiful dwelling place in mindfulness, joy, and happiness. If we really want to know what we actually take refuge in reality, rather than just in a lip service way, then let's look at our habit energies. That's the manifestation of abode here, of dwelling place. The wise depend on nothing, have no likes or dislikes. Sorrow and selfishness do not stain that one, like water does not stick to a lotus leaf. Just as a drop of water does not stick to a lotus leaf or water on a lotus flower, so the wise person does not adhere to the seen, the heard, or the sensed. Being purified, they don't conceive upon the seen, heard, and cognized, and don't wish for purification from another. Such a person neither takes on passion nor pushes it away. So much of this week's poem carries such incredibly evocative imagery that I almost want to let it speak for itself. The phrase depend on nothing means nothing exterior, not to depend on any external condition, because it's subject to change, but rather to have confidence in your path and in yourself, which I think is one of the most important invitations for us at this moment in time. To have no likes or dislikes. So again, this means not shutting down to anything. Of course, we're going to have some preferences. I think many of you know that I myself am not the #1 fan of seaweed. Just like Tay has his durian that he does not really enjoy at all, I'm also not a fan of seaweed. I've tried to love it. I've really tried to love it. And in a loving kindness, unconditional friendliness way, I can definitely experience that sense of friendliness towards seaweed. It's such a healthy and wonderful thing. But I myself am not somebody who would enjoy seaweed to eat. I've tried, but it doesn't work for me. Thanks to the practice of metta meditation, of loving kindness meditation, rather than being an enemy of seaweed, I now consider myself seaweed adjacent. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where we want to become daily friends, but we can coexist quite happily. So here, with having no likes and dislikes, it doesn't mean becoming an unfeeling zombie and shutting out parts of our experience, but it means to recognize this for what it is. Most of us, with our likes and dislikes, often they can be just habitual reactions, and we haven't really considered where they come from. So here, when we're talking about having no likes and dislikes, we're speaking about understanding the roots of these preferences and not just behaving in an automatic way. So finally, we read, such a person neither takes on passion nor pushes it away. Being cleansed, they don't conceive upon the seen, the heard, and cognized, and don't wish for purification from another person. So here we're reminded to remain open to all of our experiences and not be drawn towards some things or push away some other things, calling some things good and other things bad. Things are as they are. A while back, with my health situation, I noticed that I was getting in the mindset of calling some days, well, not even days, some moments, good moments, and other moments, not so good moments. And then I started to contemplate, why am I calling some moments good? Is a moment good because there's less pain? Is it good because there's less of some other symptom? Or what means that a moment is bad in some way? And I realized that this idea of, in my own experience, of like pain being bad and ease being good, it was a kind of something that I wanted to understand a little bit more deeply. So for me, now I am quite reticent to call moments with pain bad or moments without pain good. They just are as they are. And whether a moment is good or yet to become good depends on the way in which I interact with it, the way in which I approach it, the way in which I allow it to call me forth. Things are as they are. So we're also invited in this verse to recognize our tendency to conceive upon our experiences. This means to recognize our human tendency to interpret or to tell ourselves stories about our experience, and to call that interpretation reality. The poem ends with what I consider to be the ancient Buddhist equivalent of a mic drop. Don't wish for purification from another. In this poem, we're reminded that there's nothing outside of your own mind. There's nothing outside of our own mind that can give us what we're looking for. That we ourselves have the capacity to wake up, to become our own teacher, to become a Buddha. This is the essential teaching, the heart teaching of the Buddha. And it's the most challenging for many of us to accept on a deep level. So I'd like to, as we come to a close today, I'd like to offer a couple of questions, just reflection questions for these next couple of weeks in considering how to apply this poem. There are many possible points of reflection, but perhaps one reflection could be, what are the external and internal behaviors or thought patterns and so on that we return to and rely on in our daily life? So what are our habitual abodes? And the second reflection question is, what are the things that I call mine in an experience when I'm experiencing a strong emotion coming up, for example, what input in that moment have I called mine? Have I identified with in some way? So I wish everybody a wonderful couple of weeks of practice. I hope you've enjoyed this talk and benefited from it. It's certainly been a delight to be together with everybody. We'll end with a sound of the bell.